How to deal with toxic people without stress. Most people believe toxic people are the problem. They're wrong. The real problem is that toxic people know exactly how to control your emotions. They know how to trigger your anger, steal your attention, drain your energy, and occupy your mind long after the conversation ends. The moment someone can control your emotional state, they have power over your life. This audiobook is about taking that power back, not by changing toxic people, not by arguing with them, not by defeating them, but by becoming someone they can no longer affect. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop expecting toxic people to change. There is one mistake that keeps people trapped around toxic individuals for years. Not days, not months, years. The mistake is simple. They keep expecting change. They keep believing that one day the toxic person will wake up and suddenly become reasonable, suddenly become respectful, suddenly become self-aware, suddenly become the person they should have been all along. But life doesn't work that way. People show you who they are long before they tell you who they are. That is the key. Most suffering comes from the gap between reality and expectation. You expect honesty, they continue lying. You expect respect, they continue disrespecting you. You expect accountability, they continue blaming everyone else. And every time it happens, you are shocked. Every time it happens, you are disappointed. Every time it happens, you tell yourself the same story. Maybe next time, but next time arrives, and nothing changes, because toxic people reveal themselves through patterns, not promises. Believe patterns, not words. Read that again in your mind. Believe patterns, not words. A manipulative coworker may promise to support you. They may smile at your face. They may compliment your work. But every time an opportunity appears, they take credit. Every time a mistake happens, they shift blame. Every time they need something, they suddenly become friendly. The pattern never changes. Yet many people ignore the pattern because they are listening to the promise. Believe patterns, not words. A selfish relative may apologize after every argument. They may say they understand. They may promise to do better. They may even sound sincere. But a week later, the same behavior returns. The same criticism, the same disrespect, the same emotional manipulation. Again and again, the words change. The pattern stays the same. Believe patterns, not words. A controlling partner may repeatedly tell you how much they love you, but love without respect is not love. Love without trust is not love. Love without freedom is not love. When someone repeatedly controls, criticizes, manipulates, and diminishes you, the pattern is speaking louder than the promise. The problem is not that people fail to see these patterns. The problem is that they refuse to accept them. Acceptance is difficult. Acceptance requires courage, because once you accept reality, you lose the fantasy. You lose the fantasy that one day everything will magically improve. You lose the fantasy that one conversation will change years of behavior. You lose the fantasy that your patience alone can transform another human being. And that is painful, but it is also liberating, because the moment you stop expecting toxic people to change, you stop giving away your emotional power. You have a choice. You can spend years trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, or you can spend those years building your own peace. You have a choice. Many people believe they are being compassionate when they keep tolerating toxic behavior, but often they are simply avoiding reality. Compassion does not require self-destruction. Kindness does not require self-sacrifice. Patience does not require endless suffering. That is the key. You don't need their permission to accept the truth. You don't need their permission to move on. You don't need their permission to protect your peace. Imagine touching a hot stove. The first time, it is an accident. The second time, it is a lesson. The third time, it is a choice. The same principle applies to toxic people. The first betrayal may surprise you. The second betrayal should educate you. The third betrayal should reveal the pattern. After that, continuing to expect different results becomes self-inflicted disappointment, because toxic people reveal themselves through patterns, not promises. Believe patterns, not words. Most people don't suffer because they are surrounded by toxic individuals. They suffer because they continue negotiating with reality. Reality says this person is selfish. They argue. Reality says this person is manipulative. They argue. Reality says this person has no intention of changing. They argue. Reality keeps presenting evidence. They keep rejecting it. And every rejection creates more pain. Acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is strength. Acceptance means seeing clearly. Acceptance means refusing to lie to yourself. Acceptance means refusing to confuse hope with evidence. That is the key. Hope is not evidence. Potential is not evidence. Promises are not evidence. Patterns are evidence. Many people become trapped because they fall in love with potential. They see who someone could become. They see who someone might become. They see who someone promised to become. But they ignore who that person consistently chooses to be. Never build your life around potential. Build your life around reality. You have a choice. You can judge people by their intentions, or you can judge people by their actions. Intentions are invisible. Actions are undeniable. Actions tell the truth. Patterns tell the truth. Promises often hide the truth. That is why toxic people can remain in someone's life for decades. Not because their behavior is hidden, but because their behavior is repeatedly excused. Every excuse delays freedom. Every excuse delays freedom. Every excuse extends suffering. Every excuse keeps the cycle alive. When you stop expecting change, you stop being disappointed. That sentence alone can transform your life. When you stop expecting change, you stop being disappointed. Notice what it does not mean. It does not mean becoming bitter. It does not mean hating people. It does not mean giving up on humanity. It simply means accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it were, not as you hope it will become, not as someone promised it would be, as it is. That is the key. The goal is not to change toxic people. The goal is to stop allowing toxic people to control your emotional state. And that process begins with acceptance. Because once you accept reality, you become free to make better decisions. You become free. You become free to walk away. You become free to protect your peace. Most importantly, you become free from constant disappointment. Because when you stop expecting change, you stop being disappointed. And when disappointment loses its grip on you, toxic people begin losing their power over you. You have taken the first step. You have stopped fighting reality. You have stopped negotiating with patterns. You have started seeing clearly. But toxic people do not only rely on false promises, they rely on something even more powerful. They rely on emotional reactions. And if you want to become someone toxic people can no longer control, you must learn how to recognize the trap before you step into it. That is where we're going next. Chapter 2. Recognize the hook before you bite. If toxic people had one superpower, it would not be intelligence. It would not be strength. It would not be influence. It would be their ability to get emotional reactions from other people. That is their fuel. That is their currency. That is their source of power. Most toxic people are not trying to solve problems. They are trying to create reactions. And the moment you understand that, everything changes. Because suddenly, what looked like a disagreement becomes something else. What looked like criticism becomes something else. What looked like conflict becomes something else. You begin to see the hook. And once you see the hook, you have a choice. You can bite, or you can walk away. Most people never realize they're being baited. They think they're defending themselves. They think they're explaining themselves. They think they're explaining themselves. They think they're proving a point. But in reality, they are doing exactly what the toxic person wanted them to do. They are reacting. That is the key. Toxic people often don't care whether your reaction is positive or negative, because every emotional reaction gives them influence over your state of mind. Think about someone who constantly criticizes you. No matter what you do, they find a flaw. No matter how hard you work, they point out what went wrong. No matter how much progress you make, they focus on what is missing. Why? Because they know criticism creates emotional movement, and emotional movement creates vulnerability. The moment you become angry, defensive, frustrated, or desperate to prove yourself, you are no longer operating from strength. You are operating from reaction, and reaction is where toxic people thrive. You have a choice. Imagine a fisherman standing by a lake. The fisherman does not chase the fish. The fisherman throws out bait. Then he waits. The fish catches itself. Many toxic people operate exactly the same way. They throw out criticism. They throw out insults. They throw out guilt. They throw out passive, aggressive comments. Then they wait. Waiting for you to bite. Waiting for you to react. Waiting for you to give them access to your emotions. And most people do. Every single day. Someone makes a rude comment. They react. Someone questions their worth. They react. Someone challenges their decision. They react. Someone spreads gossip. They react. The hook works again and again because people fail to recognize it for what it is. A trap. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every attack deserves your attention. That is the key. One of the most common hooks is guilt. Toxic people love guilt because guilt makes good people easy to control. A manipulative friend might say, "After everything I've done for you." A controlling partner might say, "If you really loved me, you would do this." A toxic family member might say, "Family should always come first." Notice what is happening. The goal isn't understanding. The goal is pressure. The goal is compliance. The goal is making you feel responsible for their emotions. But you have a choice. You can accept responsibility for your actions, or you can accept responsibility for everyone's feelings. The first is healthy. The second is impossible. You are not responsible for managing another adult's emotions. You are not responsible for keeping everyone happy. You are not responsible for fixing every disappointment someone experiences. You don't need their permission to stop carrying burdens that don't belong to you. Another common hook is outrage. Some people constantly create drama. They turn small problems into major crises. They exaggerate. They complain. They provoke. They stir conflict. And when everyone around them becomes emotionally exhausted, they gain control of the situation. Why? Because emotional chaos makes people easier to manipulate. That is why calm is power. Read that again. Calm is power. The calmer you remain, the harder you become to control. The calmer you remain, the clearer you think. The calmer you remain, the more options you see. Toxic people want urgency. They want immediate reactions. They want emotional decisions. Because emotional decisions are often bad decisions. You have a choice. Pause, observe, think, then respond. Or choose not to respond at all. Sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is mastery. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing they must answer everything. They believe every accusation requires a defense. Every insult requires a comeback. Every misunderstanding requires an explanation. It doesn't. You don't need their permission to remain silent. You don't need their permission to disengage. You don't need their permission to protect your peace. A person says something unfair. You have a choice. React immediately, or pause. A person insults you. You have a choice. Defend your ego, or protect your energy. A person tries to provoke you. You have a choice. Join their emotional storm, or stay anchored in your own calm. That is the key. The strongest response is often no response, not because you are afraid, not because you've given up, but because you've recognized the hook, and you are refusing to bite. Think about how many hours people lose every year replaying toxic conversations. How many nights are spent imagining better comebacks. how many mornings are ruined by someone else's negativity. How much energy is wasted on people who contribute nothing to your growth. The cost is enormous, not just emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. Every reaction consumes energy. Every argument consumes attention. Every emotional battle consumes time. And your attention is one of the most valuable things you possess. Protect it, guard it, invest it wisely, because where your attention goes, your life follows. That is why recognizing the hook is such an important skill. The moment you see the bait, you stop becoming a victim of it. You stop operating on autopilot. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop allowing toxic people to dictate your emotional state. Instead, you become intentional. You become aware. You become difficult to manipulate. And that changes everything. Remember this phrase: the strongest response is often no response. Repeat it. The strongest response is often no response. The strongest response is often no response. Because every hook loses power when nobody bites. Every manipulator loses influence when nobody reacts. Every toxic person loses leverage when nobody surrenders their emotional control. That is freedom. And freedom begins with awareness. You have learned how to recognize the hook. But recognizing the hook is only the beginning, because many people still get trapped by toxic behavior for another reason. They take everything personally. They assume every criticism is a reflection of their worth. They assume every insult contains truth. They assume every negative opinion deserves a place in their mind. And that is exactly what we'll dismantle next. Chapter 3. Stop taking everything personally. One of the greatest gifts you can give yourself is this: stop making everything about you. That may sound harsh, but it is true. Many people spend their entire lives carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to carry. Someone else criticizes them. They take it personally. Someone else ignores them. They take it personally. Someone else behaves badly. They take it personally. And before they realize it, they are carrying around the opinions, frustrations, insecurities, and emotional baggage of everyone they meet. That is exhausting. That is unnecessary. And most importantly, it is avoidable. That is the key. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. Read that again. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. Most people act as if every criticism contains truth. Every insult contains wisdom. Every negative opinion deserves investigation. It doesn't. Many opinions are simply reflections of the person expressing them. Nothing more. Think about a jealous coworker. You get promoted. You work hard. You improve your skills. You earn an opportunity. Instead of celebrating your success, they criticize it. They say you were lucky. They say you didn't deserve it. They say someone else should have gotten the position. Now here is the question. Did your achievement suddenly lose value because someone became jealous? Of course not. Their reaction reveals something about them, not about you. That is the key. Toxic behavior often says more about the other person than it does about you. A jealous person sees threats. An insecure person sees competition. An angry person sees enemies. A manipulative person sees opportunities. And if you aren't careful, you'll spend years trying to defend yourself against problems that were never yours in the first place. You have a choice. You can spend your life trying to control what people think, or you can spend your life controlling what you allow to affect you. One path leads to freedom. The other leads to exhaustion. Most toxic people operate through projection. Projection is simple. People take their own fears, flaws, insecurities, and frustrations and place them onto someone else. The dishonest person accuses others of dishonesty. The insecure person constantly criticizes others. The selfish person calls everyone else selfish. The controlling person claims everyone else is controlling. What they're really doing is revealing themselves. But most people miss this. Instead of recognizing the projection, they internalize it. They absorb it, they accept it, and then they suffer because of it. You don't have to do that. You have a choice. Imagine walking through a city street. A stranger you've never met suddenly points at you and says something rude. Would that statement instantly define your worth? Would your entire identity change because one random person expressed an opinion? Of course not. Yet many people give enormous power to opinions that should carry no weight at all. Why? Because they assume every opinion matters. It doesn't. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. The truth is simple. People see the world through their own filters, their experiences, their fears, their beliefs, their wounds. That is why toxic people are so dangerous. Two people can look at the so dangerous. That is why toxic people are so dangerous. Not because they speak the truth, but because they speak with confidence. And many people mistake confidence for accuracy. Never make that mistake. Someone can be loud and wrong. Someone can be confident and wrong. Someone can be certain and wrong. Volume is not truth. Confidence is not truth. Reality is truth. That is the key. One of the biggest emotional traps is seeking universal approval. People want everyone to like them, everyone to understand them, everyone to support them, everyone to agree with them. That will never happen, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter how kind you become. Someone will misunderstand you, someone will criticize you, someone will judge you. That is life. The moment you accept that reality, you stop wasting energy fighting it. You don't need their permission to be yourself. You don't need their approval to move forward. You don't need their validation to know your value. The need for approval is one of the easiest ways toxic people gain control. Why? Because if your self-worth depends on approval, they can manipulate your self-worth. If your confidence depends on praise, they can control your confidence. If your happiness depends on acceptance, they can control your happiness. That is the key. The more dependent you are on external validation, the easier you are to manipulate. The stronger your internal validation becomes, the harder you are to control. You have a choice. Build your identity on opinions, or build your identity on principles. Opinions change. Principles endure. Opinions fluctuate. Principles remain stable. Opinions belong to others. Principles belong to you. A toxic person may criticize your decision. But if the decision aligns with your values, their criticism changes nothing. A toxic person may misunderstand your intentions. But if your intentions are clear, their misunderstanding changes nothing. A toxic person may attempt to define you, but only you decide who you are. That is the key. Many people become prisoners of perception. They spend years managing appearances, defending reputations, correcting misunderstandings, explaining themselves, trying to control narratives. Meanwhile, truly confident people focus on something else entirely: their character, their actions, their integrity, because they understand something powerful. You cannot control what people think, but you can control how you live, and that is enough. In fact, it is more than enough. Remember this: not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. Repeat it. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Not every insult deserves your energy. Not every judgment deserves your concern. The more selective you become about what enters your mind, the more peaceful your life becomes. Because mental peace is not created by controlling other people. Mental peace is created by controlling access. Access to your thoughts, access to your emotions, access to your attention. And toxic people lose power the moment they lose access. The goal is not to convince everyone that you are worthy. The goal is to recognize that your worth was never theirs to determine. That realization changes everything, because once you stop taking everything personally, you stop carrying burdens that were never yours. You stop absorbing negativity. You stop defending yourself against projections. You stop surrendering your emotional state. to every opinion that crosses your path. And that is freedom. You are beginning to take your power back, but there is still another trap waiting for many people, even after they stop taking things personally. They continue wasting something incredibly valuable, something they can never get back, their energy. And if you truly want freedom from toxic people, you must learn how to protect it. That is where we're going next. Chapter 4. Protect your energy like your life depends on it. Most people are careful with their money. They think before spending it. They budget it. They protect it. They track where it goes. They become frustrated when it is wasted. But those same people will give away their emotional energy without a second thought. They will spend hours arguing, hours worrying, hours replaying conversations, hours thinking about people they don't even like, hours carrying stress that changes nothing, and then they wonder why they feel exhausted. That is the key. Your attention is your most valuable asset, not your money, not your possessions, not your status. Your attention, because whatever receives your attention receives your life. Think about that. Every minute you spend focused on something is a minute of your life you will never get back. Every hour spent obsessing over toxic people is an hour stolen from your growth. Every day spent trapped in emotional drama is a day not invested in your future. You have a choice. You can invest your attention, or you can waste it. Most toxic people survive because people continue feeding them attention. Attention is their fuel. Attention is their reward. Attention is the oxygen that keeps the drama alive. And many people provide that oxygen without realizing it. A toxic coworker makes a rude comment. You think about it all day. A toxic family member criticizes you. You replay it all night. A toxic friend spreads gossip. You discuss it with 5 different people. Notice what happened. The toxic person occupied your mind long after the interaction ended. They left the room, but they took your energy with them. That is the key. The real damage is often not what toxic people say. The real damage is how long you continue thinking about it afterward. Many people believe emotional exhaustion comes from difficult situations. Sometimes it does, but often emotional exhaustion comes from mental repetition, the endless replay, the endless analysis, the endless what-if scenarios. What should I have said? What should I have done? What do they think about me? Why would they say that? The mind loops again and again and again. Meanwhile, your energy disappears. Your focus disappears. Your peace disappears. You have a choice. You can keep replaying the problem, or you can redirect your attention toward the solution, because attention is a resource, just like money. Imagine carrying a backpack full of cash. Every argument costs $100. Every unnecessary worry costs another 100. Every toxic conversation costs another 100. Eventually, you'd become extremely selective. You'd stop wasting money on things that don't matter. Yet many people do the opposite with their emotional energy. They hand it out freely, to strangers, to critics, to manipulators, to toxic people, to people who have done absolutely nothing to earn it. That is the key. Your energy should be treated as something valuable, because it is. The quality of your life depends on where your energy goes. If your energy constantly flows toward negativity, your life will feel negative. If your energy constantly flows toward conflict, your life will feel chaotic. If your energy constantly flows toward drama, your life will feel exhausting. But if your energy flows toward growth, learning, health, relationships, purpose, and peace, your life begins to transform. Nothing more, nothing less. Many people spend years trying to manage toxic people. What they should be managing is their own attention. You cannot control every difficult person. You cannot control every rude comment. You cannot control every criticism. But you can control where your attention goes afterward. That is the key. Control your attention. Control your attention. Use you. The event lasts 10 seconds, but you spend 10 hours thinking about it. The insult wasn't the problem. The 10 hours were: a toxic coworker undermines you during a meeting. The moment lasts 5 minutes, but you spend the entire weekend replaying it. The meeting wasn't the biggest problem. The replay was: a family member says something unfair. The conversation ends, but your mind continues carrying it for days. The conversation wasn't the greatest expense. The emotional investment afterward was. This is why mentally strong people appear different. They are not immune to negativity. They simply recover faster. They refuse to rent space in their minds to people who don't deserve it. That is the key. Not everyone deserves access to your mental space. Not everyone deserves access to your emotions. Not everyone deserves access to your attention. Access must be earned. And toxic people rarely earn it. You have a choice. Every single day, you can wake up and focus on problems, or focus on possibilities. You can focus on criticism, or focus on improvement. You can focus on toxic people, or focus on building a better life. The direction of your attention determines the direction of your future. Most people underestimate this principle. They believe success comes from intelligence, or talent, or luck. Those things matter, but focus matters more, because your focus determines your actions, and your actions determine your results. That is why toxic people are so dangerous, not because they destroy your future directly, but because they distract you from building it. Every hour spent in drama is an hour not spent improving yourself. Every hour spent arguing is an hour not spent learning. Every hour spent seeking revenge is an hour not spent growing. Toxic people win when they become the center of your attention. Don't give them that victory. You don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need their approval to focus on your goals. You don't need their cooperation to protect your peace. Your attention belongs to you. Guard it, protect it, direct it intentionally. Because where attention goes, energy flows. And where energy flows, life grows. Remember that. Your attention is your most valuable asset. Repeat it. Your attention is your most valuable asset. Your attention is your most valuable asset. Once you truly understand that, everything changes. You become more selective, more intentional, more disciplined. You stop engaging in unnecessary battles. You stop chasing pointless validation. You stop carrying emotional burdens that offer no return. Instead, you invest your energy where it creates value, where it creates peace, where it creates growth. That is how you reclaim control. That is how you become stronger. That is how toxic people begin losing their influence over your life. Because the less access they have to your attention, the less power they have over your emotions. But protecting your energy requires another skill, a skill many people misunderstand, a skill often confused with coldness, indifference, or emotional suppression, the skill of emotional detachment. And when used correctly, it becomes one of the most powerful forms of self-protection you will ever develop. That is where we're going next. Chapter 5. Master the art of emotional detachment. When people hear the phrase, emotional detachment, they often misunderstand it. They imagine someone cold, someone distant, someone who doesn't care, someone who has completely shut down emotionally. But that is not emotional detachment. That is emotional avoidance. And there is a huge difference. True emotional detachment is not about feeling less. It is about being controlled less. That is the key. Emotional detachment means refusing to surrender your emotional state to another person. It means remaining in control of yourself, even when other people lose control of themselves. It means keeping your peace when others are creating chaos. It means protecting your mind when others are trying to provoke it. Most people live the opposite way. Their emotions are constantly being controlled by external events. A compliment makes them happy, an insult ruins their day. Praise gives them confidence. Criticism destroys it. Acceptance makes them feel worthy. Rejection makes them feel worthless. Their emotional state changes based on what other people do. and that is dangerous. Because the moment someone else controls your emotions, they control part of your life. You have a choice. You can allow your emotional state to be dictated by circumstances, or you can learn to anchor it within yourself. One path creates dependence. The other creates freedom. Think about a toxic coworker. Every morning they complain. Every afternoon they criticize. Every meeting they create tension. Most people absorb that energy. They carry it home. They think about it at dinner. They replay it before bed. The coworker leaves the office, but the emotional impact remains. Why? Because they absorbed what they should have observed. That is the key. Observe. Don't absorb. Repeat that. Observe. Don't absorb. Observe. Don't absorb. This may be the most important phrase in this entire audiobook, because it changes how you interact with difficult people. Instead of absorbing their anger, you observe it. Instead of absorbing their negativity, you observe it. Instead of absorbing their frustration, you observe it, you recognize it. You acknowledge it, but you refuse to carry it. Imagine standing outside during a rainstorm. You can acknowledge that it is raining. You can observe the storm. You can see the clouds. You can hear the thunder. But that doesn't mean you have to stand in the middle of it. The same principle applies to toxic people. You can acknowledge their negativity without participating in it. You can recognize their anger without making it your anger. You can witness their emotional chaos without inviting it into your own mind. That is emotional detachment. And it is a skill that becomes stronger with practice. Many people believe they must match the emotional intensity of the person they're dealing with. Someone raises their voice, they raise theirs. Someone becomes angry, they become angry. Someone become angry. Someone becomes dramatic, they become dramatic. But this only creates more chaos. Emotion multiplied by emotion creates emotional explosion. Calm multiplied by awareness creates control. That is the key. The strongest person in the room is often the calmest person in the room, not the loudest, not the most aggressive, not the most emotional. The calmest, because calm people think clearly, calm people make better decisions, calm people are difficult to manipulate. Toxic people often expect emotional reactions. They expect defensiveness. They expect outrage. They expect arguments. When they don't get those reactions, they lose leverage. Imagine someone trying to start an argument. They insult you, you remain calm. They criticize you, you remain calm. They attempt to provoke you, you remain calm. Suddenly, the entire dynamic changes. Why? Because they no longer have access to your emotional controls. And that is what emotional detachment does. It removes access. You don't need their permission to stay calm. You don't need their approval to remain centered. You don't need their understanding to protect your peace. Many people confuse detachment with weakness. It is actually the opposite. Anyone can react. Anyone can lose their temper. Anyone can surrender to emotion. But remaining composed under pressure requires discipline. Remaining calm during conflict requires strength. Remaining centered while others are chaotic requires mastery. That is the key. It is not about suppression. It is about discipline. Suppression says, I feel this emotion, but I will pretend it doesn't exist. Detachment says, I feel this emotion, but I will choose how I respond. Those are completely different things. Emotionally, detached people still experience anger. They still experience disappointment. They still experience frustration. The difference is that they don't become slaves to those emotions. They acknowledge them, process them, learn from them, then move forward. You have a choice. Feel your emotions, or become your emotions. One path creates awareness. The other creates suffering. Think, about family drama. Every family has it. Simone gossips. Simone criticizes. Simone creates tension. Simone brings old problems back to life. Most people get pulled into the cycle. They defend themselves, attack back, take sides, carry resentment. The drama continues, year after year, decade after decade. But emotionally detached people approach it differently. They recognize the pattern. They refuse the invitation. They observe. They don't absorb. And because they don't absorb, the drama loses its power. The same principle applies online. A stranger leaves a negative comment. Most people react emotionally. They argue, defend themselves, obsess over it. But emotionally detached people understand something important. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every attack deserves engagement. Not every critic deserves access. That is the key. One of the greatest forms of freedom is learning that you do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. Read that again. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. Just because someone wants conflict does not mean you must participate. Just because someone wants drama does not mean you must provide it. Just because someone wants your energy does not mean you must give it away. You have a choice. Every single interaction, every single conflict, you can react automatically or respond intentionally. The difference between those two choices determines the quality of your life. Because reactions are impulsive. Responses are deliberate. Reactions create regret. Responses create peace. Reactions give away power. Responses preserve power. That is the key. Observe. Don't absorb. Make that your rule. Make that your habit. Make that your default response to difficult people. Observe the criticism. Don't absorb it. Observe the negativity. Don't absorb it. Observe the manipulation. Don't absorb it. Observe the emotional chaos. Don't absorb it. Because the moment you stop absorbing everything around you, you become emotionally lighter, stronger, calmer, more resilient, and far more difficult to control. That is the real purpose of emotional detachment. Not to become cold, not to become free. Free from unnecessary emotional suffering. Free from toxic influence. Free from constant emotional exhaustion. And freedom is exactly what toxic people fear most. Because free people are difficult to manipulate, but emotional detachment alone is not enough. You can observe toxic behavior, you can refuse to absorb it, and still allow it to remain in your life. That is why the next step is essential. You must learn how to create limits. Clear limits, strong limits, non-negotiable limits. Because peace without boundaries rarely lasts. That is where we're going next. Chapter 6. Set boundaries without explanations. One of the biggest mistakes people make with toxic individuals is believing they need to justify every boundary they set. They explain, they defend, they negotiate, they apologize, they over-explain. And then they wonder why their boundaries never work. Here is the truth. A boundary that requires endless explanation is not a boundary, it is a request. That is the key. A boundary does not require permission. Read that again. A boundary does not require permission. Many people treat boundaries like a courtroom argument. They gather evidence, prepare speeches, present their case, and hope the other person agrees. But boundaries are not debates. Boundaries are decisions. You decide what behavior you will accept. You decide what behavior you will reject. You decide how people may treat you. And you decide what happens when those limits are crossed. That is it. No committee meeting required. No unanimous approval required. No permission required. You have a choice. You can spend your life trying to convince people to respect your boundaries. Or you can enforce them. Only one of those options works. Think about a toxic friend who constantly calls late at night to unload their problems. Every time they call, the conversation lasts hours. Every time they call, your energy disappears. Every time they call, Your peace is interrupted. Most people respond by explaining, "I am really tired. I've been busy. I have a lot going on," but the behavior continues. Why? Because explanations often become openings for negotiation, openings for guilt, openings for manipulation. A simple boundary sounds different. I am unavailable after 9 p.m. That is it. No speech, no defense, no debate. The boundary stands. That is the key. Toxic people often see explanations as invitations to negotiate. The more you explain, the more material they have to work with. Imagine telling a manipulative family member, "I can't come because I am exhausted from work." What happens? They don't hear the boundary, they hear the explanation, and suddenly they start attacking the explanation. You are not that tired. You always have excuses. You make time for everyone else. Notice what happened. The conversation shifted away from your decision. Now you are defending yourself. Now you are justifying yourself. Now you are trapped. A boundary would have sounded different. I won't be attending. Simple, clear, complete. A boundary does not require permission. One of the reasons people struggle with boundaries is guilt. They fear disappointing others. They fear being disliked. They fear being called selfish. So they sacrifice themselves to avoid temporary discomfort. But in doing so, they create permanent frustration. That is the key. Every time you betray your own boundary, you teach people how to treat you. Read that carefully. Every time you betray your own boundary, you teach people how to treat you. If you repeatedly tolerate disrespect, people learn that disrespect is acceptable. If you repeatedly tolerate manipulation, people learn that manipulation works. If you repeatedly tolerate toxic behavior, people learn there are no consequences. The lesson is reinforced every single time, not by their behavior, by your response to it. You have a choice. Protect your comfort for a moment, or protect your peace for a lifetime. Many people confuse boundaries with punishment. They are not the same. Punishment is about controlling others. Boundaries are about protecting yourself. Punishment says, "I want to change your behavior." Boundaries say, "I am changing my access." That is the key. Healthy boundaries focus on your actions, not theirs. You cannot force someone to stop being toxic. You cannot force someone to become respectful. You cannot force someone to become self-aware. But you can decide how much access they have to you. That decision belongs to you. And you don't need their permission to make it. Consider the workplace. Perhaps you work with someone who constantly gossips. Every conversation turns negative. Every interaction becomes drama. Every discussion becomes criticism. Most people engage. They listen, participate, contribute. Then they complain about the negativity. A boundary might look different. You excuse yourself. You redirect the conversation. You limit interaction. You protect your energy. No confrontation required. No dramatic speech required. Just action. Because boundaries are communicated through behavior far more effectively than words. Think about that. People learn your standards from what you tolerate, not from what you announce. A person who repeatedly says, "I won't accept disrespect," but continually tolerates disrespect teaches others that the statement means nothing. A person who quietly removes themselves from disrespectful situations teaches others that the standard is real. That is the key. Enforcement creates credibility. Words alone. Many toxic people become angry when boundaries appear. Expect that. In fact, resistance is often proof that the boundary was necessary. Why? Because people who benefited from unlimited access rarely enjoy losing it. The friend who constantly drains your energy may complain. The manipulative relative may become offended. The controlling partner may accuse you of changing. The toxic coworker may become frustrated. Let them. Their reaction is information, not instruction. Their reaction tells you how they feel. It does not tell you what you must do. You have a choice. You can make decisions based on your values, or make decisions based on other people's reactions. The first creates freedom. The second creates dependence. Many people spend years imprisoned by the fear of being misunderstood. They avoid boundaries because someone might get upset. They avoid saying no because someone might feel disappointed. They avoid protecting themselves because someone might criticize them. But criticism is not catastrophe. Disappointment is not disaster. Disapproval is not danger. That is the key. You can survive someone's negative reaction. You can survive someone's disappointment. You can survive someone's misunderstanding. What becomes much harder to survive is years of self-betrayal. Years of saying yes when you mean no. Years of tolerating what you know is wrong. Years of sacrificing your peace to keep other people comfortable. Eventually, the cost becomes too high. That is why boundaries are an act of self-respect. Every healthy boundary sends a message. The message is simple. My well-being matters. My peace matters. My time matters. My energy matters. And if you don't believe those things, nobody else will either. Remember this phrase. A boundary does not require permission. Repeat it. A boundary does not require permission. A boundary does not require permission. You don't need approval to protect your mental health. You don't need consensus to protect your energy. You don't need agreement to protect your peace. You simply need the courage to act, because boundaries are not about controlling toxic people. They are about preventing toxic people from controlling you. That is the real purpose. That is the real power. And once you understand that, you stop wasting energy on explanations. You stop seeking permission. You stop negotiating your worth. You simply decide, and then you act accordingly. That is strength. But even strong boundaries cannot solve every problem. Sometimes you'll encounter people who don't want understanding. They don't want resolution. They don't want truth. They want conflict. They want confusion. They want confusion. They want control. And if you don't recognize that, you'll waste endless energy trying to reason with people who have no interest in being reasonable. That is where we're going next. Chapter 7. Never argue with someone committed to misunderstanding you. One of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that not everyone wants the truth. Most people assume that if they explain themselves clearly enough, others will eventually understand. If they stay calm enough, patient enough, reasonable enough, the misunderstanding will disappear. But life doesn't always work that way. Some people are not seeking understanding. They are seeking control. That is the key. You cannot win a debate against a person who profits from confusion. Read that again. You cannot win a debate against a person who profits from confusion. Many toxic people do not approach conversations with the goal of finding answers. They approach conversations with the goal of gaining leverage. They want to keep you defending yourself. They want to keep you explaining yourself. They want to keep you emotionally engaged. Because as long as you remain emotionally engaged, they remain influential. Think about an argument you've had with someone who was determined not to understand you. You explained your position. They ignored it. You clarified your point. They twisted it. You answered their question. They changed the subject. You addressed the new issue. They brought up something completely unrelated. The conversation never moved forward. Why? Because forward movement was never the goal. The goal was confusion. The goal was exhaustion. The goal was control. That is the key. Some people ask questions not because they want answers. They ask questions because they want arguments. That distinction changes everything. A person seeking understanding listens. A person seeking conflict waits for their turn to attack. A person seeking understanding wants clarity. A person seeking conflict wants ammunition. A person seeking understanding moves toward resolution. A person seeking conflict moves toward chaos. Learn the difference. It will save you years of frustration. You have a choice. You can continue trying to convince someone determined to misunderstand you, or you can recognize the pattern and step away. Most people don't struggle because they lack communication skills. They struggle because they keep applying communication skills to people who have no interest in communication. Think about a manipulative family member. Every holiday becomes an argument. Every disagreement becomes personal. Every conversation becomes emotional. You explain yourself. Nothing changes. You clarify your intentions. Nothing changes. You apologize. Nothing changes. Years pass. The same arguments continue. The same misunderstandings continue. The same emotional exhaustion continues. Why? Because the issue was never communication. The issue was commitment. The other person was committed to misunderstanding you. That is the key. You cannot reason someone out of a position they did not reason themselves into. Many toxic people operate through emotional narratives. They have already decided who you are. They have already decided what your intentions are. They have already created a story in their minds. And every piece of information gets filtered through that story. No matter what you say, they interpret it according to their narrative. If they see you as selfish, everything becomes evidence of selfishness. If they see you as wrong, everything becomes evidence of wrongdoing. If they see you as the problem, everything becomes evidence that you are the problem. And no amount of explanation can compete with a story someone desperately wants to believe. You have a choice. Keep fighting their narrative, or stop participating in it. One path creates endless frustration. The other creates peace. One of the biggest mistakes people make is confusing understanding with agreement. They think, if I can just get them to understand me, everything will be okay. But understanding does not guarantee agreement, and agreement is not necessary for peace. Read that again. Agreement is not necessary for peace. Many people spend years chasing agreement. They want everyone to approve, everyone to understand, everyone to validate their choices. That is impossible. Someone will always disagree. Someone will always criticize. Someone will always misunderstand. That is part of life. The goal is not universal agreement. The goal is personal clarity. That is the key. Live your values. Let others have their opinions. You don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need their approval to make healthy decisions. You don't need their understanding to protect your peace. Many toxic people use a strategy called moving the goalposts. Nothing is ever enough. You explain one thing. They demand another explanation. You answer one accusation. They create another accusation. You solve one problem. They invent a new problem. The finish line keeps moving. Why? Because if the finish line never arrives, the argument never ends. And if the argument never ends, they maintain control. That is the key. Some people don't want solutions. They want perpetual conflict. Perpetual conflict keeps them emotionally connected to you. Perpetual conflict keeps you distracted. Perpetual conflict keeps your energy focused on them. Don't fall into that trap. Your attention is too valuable. Your peace is too valuable. Your life is too valuable. You have a choice. Invest your energy where it creates growth, or waste your energy where it creates drama. One creates a future. The other creates exhaustion. Think about how many people spend years trying to clear their name, trying to fix every misunderstanding, trying to correct every rumor, trying to manage every opinion. It is impossible. There are billions of opinions in the world. You cannot control them all, and trying to do so will destroy your peace. That is the key. You are responsible for your character, not your reputation. Character belongs to you. Reputation belongs to other people. Character is built through actions. Reputation is built through perceptions. Focus on what you control. Let go of what you don't. One of the most powerful phrases you can learn is, "I've already explained my position." That is it. No emotional speech. No endless defense. No desperate attempt to convince. Just clarity, then silence. Many people fear silence. They think silence means weakness, but often silence is strength. Silence says, "I have nothing left to prove." Silence says, "I refuse to participate in this cycle." Silence says, "My peace is more important than winning this argument." That is the key. The strongest response is not always another argument. Sometimes the strongest response is disengagement. Sometimes the strongest response is distance. Sometimes the strongest response is walking away. Not because you are defeated, because you are wise. Wise people recognize diminishing returns. Wise people recognize destructive patterns. Wise people recognize unwinnable battles, and they stop fighting them. Remember this phrase: you cannot win a debate against a person who profits from confusion. Repeat it. You cannot win a debate against a person who profits from confusion. You cannot win a debate against a person who profits from confusion. Because some people don't want understanding. They want control. Some people don't want truth. Some people don't want solutions. They want emotional access to your energy. And the moment you recognize that, everything changes. You stop defending endlessly. You stop explaining endlessly. You stop chasing validation from people committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, you protect your attention. Protect your emotional freedom. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. That is emotional maturity. And that is exactly how toxic people begin losing their power over you. Because once you stop trying to convince everyone, you free yourself to focus on something far more important. Your own standards, your own values, your own self-respect. And that is where we're going next. Chapter 8. Develop an unshakable inner standard. If toxic people have one favorite weapon, it is not criticism. It is not manipulation. It is not guilt. It is your need for approval. Because the moment your self-worth depends on someone else's opinion, your emotional freedom disappears. Think about that. If praise makes you feel valuable, criticism can make you feel worthless. If acceptance makes you feel confident, rejection can destroy your confidence. If approval becomes your source of strength, disapproval becomes your source of pain. And that is exactly why so many people remain trapped by toxic individuals. They are looking for validation in places where validation was never guaranteed. That is the key. Your value is not determined by someone else's mood. Read that again. Your value is not determined by someone else's mood. A toxic person can wake up angry and suddenly decide you are the problem. A jealous person can wake up insecure and suddenly decide you are a threat. A bitter person can wake up unhappy and suddenly decide you deserve criticism. None of that changes who you are. None of that changes your character. None of that changes your worth. But if your self-esteem is built on external approval, their opinion suddenly feels powerful. And that is dangerous, because people who need approval become easy to control. You have a choice. You can build your confidence on external validation, or you can build it on internal standards. One is fragile. The other is unshakable. Most people spend years chasing approval. Approval from parents, approval from friends, approval from coworkers, approval from partners, approval from strangers online. The pursuit never ends, because approval is temporary. One day people praise you, the next day they criticize you. One day they support you, the next day they doubt you. One day they celebrate you, the next day they forget about you. Approval changes. Character doesn't. That is the key. Strong people measure themselves differently. They don't ask, do people approve of me? They ask, am I living according to my values? That question changes everything. Because values belong to you, approval belongs to others. And the more your happiness depends on things outside your control, the less control you have over your life. The first person measures success through external reactions. If people praise them, they feel successful. If people criticize them, they feel like failures. Their emotional state changes constantly. Up, down. Up, down. Their confidence depends entirely on public opinion. The second person measures success differently. They focus on effort, integrity, discipline, growth, personal standards. Even when criticism appears, they remain steady. Even when praise appears, they remain steady. Because their identity is rooted internally, not externally. That is the key. An unshakable inner standard creates emotional stability, and emotional stability makes toxic people powerless. Why? Because toxic people often rely on emotional dependence. They want their approval to feel valuable. They want their criticism to feel devastating. They want their acceptance to feel necessary. The moment you stop needing those things, their influence begins to disappear. You don't need their permission to value yourself. You don't need their approval to respect yourself. You don't need their validation to trust yourself. Those decisions belong to you. Many people underestimate how much energy they waste trying to manage perception. They constantly ask, what do they think of me? Do they like me? Did I say the right thing? Did I make a mistake? The mind becomes trapped, constantly seeking reassurance, constantly seeking confirmation, constantly seeking approval. Meanwhile, life passes by, because approval is a moving target. No matter how much you receive, it is never enough. That is the key. External validation is addictive. The more you depend on it, the more you need it. The more you need it, the weaker you become. And toxic people recognize that weakness immediately. A manipulative person may withhold approval. A controlling person may use praise as leverage. A toxic friend may alternate between acceptance and rejection. Why? Because inconsistency creates dependence, and dependence creates control. But people with strong internal standards cannot be manipulated this way, because they already know who they are. Think about a tree during a storm. A shallow-rooted tree is easily uprooted. A deeply rooted tree remains standing. Life works the same way. When your identity is rooted in public opinion, every criticism becomes a storm. Every rejection becomes a crisis. Every disagreement becomes a threat. But when your identity is rooted in your values, your principles, and your character, you remain stable. That is the key. Strong roots create stability. One of the most important questions you can ask yourself is this: what standards do I want to live by? Not what standards other people want, not what standards social media promotes, not what standards toxic people demand. Your standards, your values, your principles. Because once you define them, you stop relying on outside opinions for direction. You have a compass. And a person with a compass is difficult to manipulate. Imagine someone criticizing your work. If you know you gave your best effort, the criticism becomes information, not devastation. Imagine someone questioning your character. If you know you acted with integrity, the accusation loses power. Imagine someone refusing to approve of your decisions. If those decisions align with your values, their disapproval changes nothing. That is the key. Confidence is not believing everyone will approve of you. Confidence is knowing you'll be okay even when they don't. Many people think confidence comes from praise. Real confidence comes from self-trust, trusting your judgment, trusting your values, trusting your ability to handle challenges, trusting yourself enough to keep moving forward even when approval disappears. That is real strength, and it cannot be given by others, because it must be built internally. You have a choice: seek approval, or build self-respect. Seek validation, or build self-trust. Seek acceptance, or build character. One path makes you dependent. The other makes you free. Remember this phrase: your value is not determined by someone else's mood. Repeat it. Your value is not determined by someone else's mood. Your value is not determined by someone else's mood. Because some people will praise you when they're happy, criticize you when they're angry, support you when it is convenient, reject you when it isn't. Their reactions are unstable. Your self-worth should not be. The goal is not to make everyone like you. The goal is to become someone you respect. The goal is not universal approval. The goal is personal integrity. The goal is not external validation. The goal is internal certainty. And once you achieve that, toxic people lose one of their most powerful weapons, because they can no longer control your emotions through approval or rejection. They can no longer manipulate your confidence through praise or criticism. They can no longer define your worth Only you can do that. That is freedom. That is strength. That is an unshakable inner standard. But there is one final lesson many people struggle to learn. Sometimes strength is not staying. Sometimes strength is leaving. Sometimes strength is leaving. Sometimes wisdom is not enduring another battle. Sometimes wisdom is walking away from it completely. That is where we're going next. Chapter 9. Learn when to walk away. One of the most powerful skills you will ever develop is knowing when to leave. Not when to argue. Not when to explain. Not when to endure. When to leave. Most people are taught that walking away is weakness, that quitting is failure, that staying proves strength. But life teaches a different lesson. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from what is destroying your peace. That is the key. Every battle is not worth fighting. Read that again. Every battle is not worth fighting. Many people spend years fighting battles that were never meant to be won. Battles for approval, battles for understanding, battles for validation, battles against toxic people who have no intention of changing. And the longer they stay in those battles, the more they lose. Not because they are weak, but because they are investing energy where there is no return. You have a choice. You can continue investing in a losing situation, or you can redirect your energy toward a better future. Most people struggle to walk away because they confuse attachment with commitment. They tell themselves, I've already invested so much. I've known this person for years. I can't leave now. I have to make it work. But time invested does not guarantee future value. Think about that. If you've spent 10 years walking in the wrong direction, the solution is not to continue walking. The solution is to change direction. The same principle applies to toxic relationships. Past investment is not a reason for future suffering. That is the key. Many people stay because of history. Wise people evaluate reality. A toxic friendship may have lasted 20 years. That doesn't make it healthy. A toxic relationship may have lasted 10 years. That doesn't make it sustainable. A toxic workplace may have provided opportunities in the past. That doesn't mean it deserves your future. Reality matters more than history. Patterns matter more than memories. The question is not, how long has this been part of my life? The question is, what is it adding to my life now? That changes everything. Because toxic situations often survive on nostalgia. People remember the good moments, the happy memories, the occasional kindness. And they use those moments to justify years of dysfunction. But one good day does not erase 100 bad ones. One kind moment does not cancel repeated disrespect. Own apology does not erase a destructive pattern. That is the key. Believe patterns, not isolated moments. You learned that lesson at the beginning of this audiobook. Now, it becomes even more important, because walking away requires clarity, and clarity comes from recognizing patterns. A toxic friend repeatedly betrays your trust. A toxic partner repeatedly ignores your boundaries. A toxic family member repeatedly creates emotional chaos. A toxic coworker repeatedly undermines your efforts. At some point, the question is no longer, can they change? The question becomes, how much longer am I willing to pay this price? You have a choice. Stay and continue paying, or leave and begin healing. Neither choice is easy, but only one creates freedom. Many people remain trapped because they fear loss. They fear loneliness. They fear uncertainty. They fear starting over, and those fears are understandable. Walking away often creates temporary discomfort, but staying in a toxic environment creates permanent damage. That is the key. Short-term discomfort is often the price of long-term peace. Think about a person trapped in a toxic relationship. Every day brings stress. Every week brings conflict. Every month brings disappointment. Yet they stay because leaving feels frightening. What they fail to realize is that fear is temporary. Misery can become permanent. The same applies to toxic friendships, toxic jobs, toxic environments, toxic habits. Sometimes the greatest risk is not leaving. Sometimes the greatest risk is staying. You don't need their permission to walk away. You don't need their approval to move forward. You don't need their understanding to choose peace. Many people wait for closure before leaving. They want one final conversation, one final explanation, one final moment of understanding. But closure is often an inside job because some people will never provide the explanation you are seeking. Some people will never admit what they did. Some people will never understand the pain they caused. Some people will never apologize. Waiting for closure from them keeps your freedom tied to their behavior. That is the key. Freedom begins when you stop needing answers from people incapable of giving them. You have a choice: wait for perfect closure, or create your own. One keeps you stuck, the other moves you forward. Walking away is not always physical. Sometimes it is emotional. Sometimes it means refusing to engage, refusing to argue, refusing to absorb negativity, refusing to participate in the cycle. You can be in the same room as someone and still walk away emotionally. You can refuse to give them access, refuse to give them influence, refuse to give them influence, refuse to give them control. That is a form of freedom, and sometimes it is the first step toward a larger exit. One of the greatest misconceptions about walking away is that people assume it means giving up. Giving up means abandoning yourself. Walking away means protecting yourself. Those are completely different things. That is the key. Walking away is not weakness. Walking away is wisdom. Wisdom recognizes diminishing returns. Wisdom recognizes destructive patterns. Wisdom recognizes when a situation is costing more than it provides, and wisdom acts accordingly. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones. At first, it feels manageable. Then it becomes tiring, then exhausting, then unbearable. Walking away from toxicity is often nothing more than putting down a weight you've been carrying for far too long. The weight may feel familiar, but familiar does not mean healthy. The burden may feel normal, but normal does not mean necessary. You have a choice: keep carrying it, or put it down. Many people discover something surprising after walking away. The peace they were searching for wasn't somewhere else. It appeared the moment the toxicity disappeared. Think about that. Sometimes growth doesn't require adding something new. Sometimes growth requires removing what has been holding you back, removing the drama, removing the manipulation, removing the negativity, removing the emotional chaos. The result is space, and in that space, healing begins. Confidence returns, clarity returns, life returns. That is the key. Every battle is not worth fighting. Repeat it. Every battle is not worth fighting. Every battle is not worth fighting. Some battles cost too much. Some conflicts offer no reward. Some relationships cannot be saved. Some situations cannot be fixed. And recognizing that is not failure. It is maturity. It is wisdom. It is strength. Because strength is not measured by how much pain you can tolerate. Strength is measured by your willingness to choose what is healthy over what is familiar. That is the lesson. That is the freedom. That is the power of walking away. But there is one final destination waiting beyond all of these lessons. A place where toxic people lose their influence completely. A place where manipulation fails. A place where emotional control becomes impossible. The ultimate goal of everything you've learned so far. Emotional independence. That is where we're going next. Chapter 10, Become Impossible to Control. Everything you have learned in this audiobook leads to one destination, one goal, one transformation: becoming impossible to control. Not controlling other people, not manipulating other people, not dominating other people, controlling yourself. Because the person who controls their emotions controls their life. The person who controls their emotions controls their life. Read that again. The person who controls their emotions controls their life. Every lesson you've learned points here. You stopped expecting toxic people to change. You learned to recognize the hook before you bite. You stopped taking everything personally. You protected your energy. You mastered emotional detachment. You set boundaries. You stopped arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You developed an unshakable inner standard. You learned when to walk away. Now all those lessons combine into one powerful reality. Toxic people lose power when they lose access. Access to your emotions, access to your attention, access to your self-worth, access to your peace, access to your mind. And that is freedom. Most people never realize how often they surrender control. A stranger insults them. Their mood changes. A coworker criticizes them. Their confidence disappears. A family member disapproves. Their anxiety increases. A toxic partner becomes angry. Their peace vanishes. Notice what happened. The emotional controls were handed away. And the moment someone else controls your emotional state, they influence your life. That is why emotional independence matters. Because freedom begins where dependence ends. You have a choice. You can continue allowing other people to determine how you feel, or you can reclaim ownership of your emotional world. One creates weakness. The other creates strength. Think about a remote control. Imagine every toxic person in your life has a button. One button creates anger. One creates insecurity. One creates insecurity. Unknown creates self-doubt. Every time they press the button, you react. Every time they reactivate the same emotional pattern, you respond automatically. That is emotional dependence. But emotionally independent people operate differently. The buttons still exist. They simply stop working. Not because life becomes easier, not because toxic people disappear, but because awareness replaces automatic reaction. That is the key. Awareness creates freedom. Reaction creates control. When you become aware of your emotional triggers, you stop being controlled by them. When you become aware of manipulation, manipulation loses effectiveness. When you become aware of toxic patterns, those patterns lose influence. Awareness changes everything. Imagine a magician performing a trick. The first time you see it, you are amazed. The second time, you start noticing details. The third time, you understand how it works. Once you understand the trick, it loses its power. Toxic behavior works the same way. Once you see the manipulation, it becomes harder to manipulate you. Once you recognize the guilt trip, it becomes harder to guilt you. Once you recognize the emotional bait, it becomes harder to provoke you. That is the key. Awareness weakens manipulation, but awareness alone is not enough. You must combine awareness with discipline. Because understanding what to do and actually doing it are two different things. You may recognize a provocation, yet still react. You may identify manipulation, yet still engage. You may understand the pattern, yet still surrender to it. That is why discipline matters. It is not about knowledge, it is about application. The strongest people are not those who know the most. The strongest people are those who consistently apply what they know. You have a choice, knowledge with discipline. Only one creates transformation. Consider two people. Both understand emotional control. Both understand boundaries. Both understand toxic behavior. But one applies the lessons daily. The other doesn't. One becomes emotionally independent. The other remains emotionally vulnerable. The difference is discipline. Not intelligence, not luck. Discipline, that is the key. It is not about perfection, it is about consistency. Many people believe emotional mastery means never feeling negative emotions. That is impossible. You will feel anger, you will feel disappointment, you will feel frustration, you will feel sadness. You are human. The goal is not eliminating emotions. The goal is preventing emotions from controlling your decisions. That distinction matters. A person can feel anger and remain wise. A person can feel disappointment and remain focused. A person can feel hurt and still maintain self-respect. The emotion is not the problem. The loss of control is the problem. That is the key. Emotional independence is not emotional numbness, it is emotional leadership. You lead your emotions. Your emotions do not lead you. Think about how different your life becomes when toxic people lose access. An insult no longer ruins your day. A criticism no longer destroys your confidence. A rejection no longer defines your worth. A manipulation attempt no longer controls your decisions. The external event remains the same. Your response changes. And when your response changes, your life changes. Because your life is not determined by what happens to you. Your life is determined by how you respond to what happens to you. That is personal power, real power, not power over others, power over yourself. The kind of power nobody can take away. The kind of power toxic people cannot manipulate. The kind of power that creates lasting peace. You don't need their permission to be calm. You don't need their approval to be confident. You don't need their validation to be worthy. You don't need their cooperation to protect your peace. Everything you need is already available to you. The only question is whether you will claim it. You have a choice. Every day, every conflict, every criticism, every challenge, react automatically or respond intentionally. Give away control or keep it. Follow emotion blindly or lead emotion wisely. The choice always belongs to you. Remember this phrase: the person who controls their emotions controls their life. Repeat it. The person who controls their emotions controls their life. The person who controls their emotions controls their life. Make it your rule. Make it your standard. Make it your identity. Because toxic people only win when they gain control over your emotional state. The moment they lose that access, they lose their power. And when they lose their power, you gain something far more valuable. Freedom. Freedom from manipulation. Freedom from emotional chaos. Freedom from unnecessary suffering. Freedom from dependence on approval. Freedom from constant reaction. Freedom to live according to your own values. Freedom to protect your own peace. Freedom to become the strongest version of yourself. That is the destination. That is the lesson. That is the transformation. You are no longer waiting for toxic people to change. You have changed. And that changes everything. The person who controls their emotions controls their life. Now the question is simple. Will you practice it? Will you live it? Will you become it? Because the next chapter is not in this audiobook. The next chapter is your life. And starting today, you have a choice. Choose peace, choose self-respect, choose emotional freedom, and become impossible to control. You have now learned a truth that most people never fully understand. Toxic people do not destroy lives because they are powerful. They destroy lives because people unknowingly hand them power. Every argument you didn't need to join. Every insult you didn't need to carry. Every criticism you didn't need to believe. Every emotional trap you didn't need to enter. Those moments change everything. Remember what you've learned. Stop expecting toxic people to change. Recognize the hook before you bite. Stop taking everything personally. Protect your energy. Master emotional detachment. Set boundaries. Refuse pointless arguments. Build your self-respect now. When to walk away. And above all, become impossible to control. Because the moment you stop reacting to every provocation, stop seeking validation from every opinion, and stop surrendering your peace to difficult people, you become free. So here is your challenge. For the next 7 days, refuse to give toxic people free access to your emotions. Observe, don't absorb. Protect your peace. And watch how quickly your life begins to change.